Thanks, Christia, for facilitating this session. So now we're going to end this symposium with Stephen Downes, who's going to help us actually wrap up all those ideas that have been exchanged today. Power, I'm sure there must be power.
There's power on every table but the one I need.
Okay, let me find power somewhere.
I'm sorry. There we go. Well hidden. Oh, it's there. Okay. Thanks. Thanks. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Merci à tous et toutes. C'était un plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui. Avez-vous fait une bonne journée? Excellent, excellent. So I've taken notes, as I mentioned before. Oh, yes. How many of you solved the mystery of the dots on the window? One? Birds, right. Do you think it's aesthetic? Okay. I'm thinking mostly birds. But the key question is that addressing a technological issue or an ethical issue? Or a maintenance issue, yeah. Extra points for that one. Okay, so I only have 15 minutes, which is awful for me. You've probably guessed that already. But we've covered an awful lot of ground during this seminar. Thank you to the students who were here. Just so you know, okay, because you know, you might not know the other people in the room. We've got some senior executives from Desire to Learn here. We've got university professors here, some people from government departments who are very influential in those departments, especially in learning development. So your contributions here in contributing these projects and your ideas are going to go to industry, they're going to go to government, they're going to go to the university, because the people who need to hear those ideas are in this room now. So thank you to you, and thank you to them for being in this space. So what did we hear? Well, I've tried to organize my thoughts around the different topics of the day, and as I mentioned earlier, put them up on a Google Doc, and I'm going to cheat a little bit and refer to my notes because I can. So one of the questions that came up is what people need to learn. We talked about 21st century literacies in that, talked a little bit about Montessori. I think that was Chris Dede talked about that. Someone from the audience talking about needing to shorten the gap between research and students' actual practice, and questioning about do schools actually have the resources to teach what we need to teach, and the question comes up indeed, how do we teach, what do we teach in a world where there won't be jobs? I heard a lot about, or we all heard a lot about focusing on things that maybe AIs can't do. Creative skills, perhaps. Empathy kept coming up on a number of occasions, although I think we need to press the question, right? Is it true that in the future computers won't be able to do these things? We think we understand right now what computers can and can't do, but the capacity of computers is increasing. 10 years ago, we would have said, computers drive a car? No way, you need human judgment to do that. But now it turns out they're better drivers than we are. It's something that we need to be careful about. And we also, there were some people talking about emerging adulthood and all of that, but really teaching people how to cope in this new kind of environment and not to be afraid of failure. And trust me, as someone who's failed a lot, You can't be afraid of failure. What about changing the system? Empowering students to deal with the way education and work will take place in the 21st century. I like the comment about what is experiential learning, and Audrey, I forgot the first name, I'm sorry. See, I told you, errors, all the time, errors. Said, it's what I do every day as an artist, which is kind of interesting. And I've always thought that, drama, art, things like that, even physical activities, these are real world skills that are being taught. It's not play, right? Art is understanding variety's representation, which is a deep philosophical concept. Drama is about empathy and putting yourself in someone else's shoes and understanding what it's like to be someone else. These are real skills. So Alistair talked about learning how to learn and gave us the scenario of the oil tanker, which I thought was like very 20th century industry, but yeah, that was just me. And then, of course, my comment was, you can't wait for education to change. You have to change it yourself. And I still believe that that's true. It's what I've done all of my life. And it's the only reason I'm standing here is because I did not follow the rules. I made my own education. When I was in school, I always had a book under my desk, and that's what I was doing instead of school. So I hope you're doing that. How do we know? How do we know what skills? How do we know what practices are going to be effective in the future? Chris Deedy talked about some of the research behind that. I'm not 100% sold on that research. Some of it is good, but the how people learn part 2 that he cited, I did a study of that and a slideshow based on it, and my main reaction to that was, yeah, it describes how people learn, but it's completely and utterly silent on why people learn that way. And if we don't know why, we really don't know how. And I think we don't know why people learn that way. We don't have the full story yet. We have to ask Kerr, what's your first name? Chris? Ian. Oh, sorry. Said we have to ask what is the underlying decisions that lead or led to using technology in a given situation. And of course the question came up, who benefits, right? For whose benefit is it? It should be for whoever is doing the learning. It should be for the ultimate recipient of whatever service is being offered. But so often the beneficiary is the producer or the provider rather than the person actually receiving the service. I also ask sometimes, what counts as data? What would count as evidence? I mean, we don't really think about that. What would count as evidence that some solution works, right? You know, we have this presumption, this solution works. What does that mean, right? Does that mean people are able to memorize things better? Does it mean they like it better? Does it mean they stayed out of jail? What kind of data would be evidence for what works? It's not yet clear. So with those preliminaries, we can ask about AI itself. I raised the question, a few others addressed, what is AI actually? And artificial intelligence, machine learning is a family of technologies that more or less are more and more approaching capability of emulating human intelligence and human capacities. That's a rough and ready definition. But we have an awful lot of presumptions we make about artificial intelligence. We think, you know, machines are, you know, well, we think Terminator, and we shouldn't think Terminator because time travel is impossible. That's the main reason. You know, we think of AIs as being emotionless. Why would we think that, right? Is Mr. Spock really our evidentiary source for our predictions of the future? Really? You know, I mean, you know, I can imagine easily an empathetic, feeling, sentimental, nostalgic to the point of ridiculousness robot. What's inherently impossible about that? The same technology that makes us like that, connections between neurons, neural nets, pattern recognition, et cetera, is what's powering AI. And so, you know, we need to question our assumptions about what AI will be like. And I would add too, and it didn't come up today, but it came up yesterday, we need to question the dichotomy, human versus AI. I think the much more likely scenario is humans augmented by AI, or ultimately AI augmented by humans. And we have to stop thinking of individual humans versus AI. We, as a society, if we organize ourselves properly, are much more intelligent, much more capable than any individual. And I think that also has to be factored into the equation. So we talked a little bit about what AI can do, what AI can't do. What about what we can do with AI? The question of manipulation of AI came up. The big problem with manipulation of AI is that it's using AI for our own very unethical purposes. You know, Chris Dede talked about that. He said, and I want to quote this, if the data is available to everyone, then the opportunity to distort is removed. I think that recent evidence has shown that this is false. That even if the data is available, the ability to distort remains. Donald Trump is a master at that. He distorts not by refuting the truth, because he can't, he just waves his hands and distracts, and there you go, distortion continues. There are all kinds of techniques for distortion, even when all of the data is available. You come back to 21st century skills, being able to deal with that kind of environment is a 21st century skill. You know, I mean, there was also the question of bias and things like that, and the data sets and the algorithms. So I've said before, AI isn't really algorithms, but the question of bias is real. It's a question that has inhabited a number of AI systems. Everybody remembers, I hope, Microsoft Tay, which was a Twitter chatbot that immediately began to be racist and misogynist, learning from Twitter, naturally. You know, I mean, it's a sad truth that sometimes our AIs are reflections of ourselves. And perhaps that's the biggest manipulation of AI of all, is that AI will behave like us. And maybe we don't like what we see very much. Culture and AI, significant question. Where does culture play into this? Navina was asking, you know, it's only when she came here to this culture that the question of girls in math was raised. You know, in other countries, particularly, as you said, with the wars and the shortage of men in society, it became normal for women and men to work side by side. That was true in this country too, in the 1950s and early 1960s, and then things changed. And why did they change? And how did that happen? And what was the role of media, and what was the role of society in making that happen? Because we made that happen somehow. We need to know about that. Our friend from African Virtual University said, the digital divide has evolved into a cultural divide. There's different ways of looking at these divides, right? Different ways of looking at not just accessibility to technology, but our attitudes towards technology. You know, and looking at the sorts of problems that we use technology to address. Is it addressing what we need? You know, is it addressing the problems of food, water, etc.? Are we using it to address global warming? Or are we using it to do things we don't necessarily need, like creating AI-based students for people to practice on, or something like that? Ethics and AI, the kind of the core of what we were doing today. There we go, silly computer. So culture comes into this, and it comes into this in a variety of different ways. As I said, the primary ethical concern, to my mind, is AI is behaving like people. But there's more than just that. I put a note in my notes, and my note is this, and it didn't come up in the discussion, but I want to raise it here. Why do superheroes fight crime? Is crime the biggest problem? You have Superman, right, could do anything, and he's fighting crime. That makes no sense, right? Superman's kind of like AI in, superhuman body form, right? Superman could carry entire glaciers and put them in deserts and solve water problems permanently. Superman could irrigate, or could till and irrigate and reap crops from entire countries. Why isn't he addressing that? Batman, right? Millionaire Bruce Wayne solves crime. That seems very self-interested to me. How we perceive the problems of society says a lot about how we perceive what those solutions ought to be. And when we look at AI, a lot of the time we're looking at solving problems that maybe aren't really problems. And that comes back into the ethical question. We talked about, what is good? The AI for Good project, focusing on art. This was mentioned by Audrey. Why do you classify art as good? And what about AI for bad? Why do we characterize this but not that? There's the question of whether ethics is based on universal values. You all know that I disagree with that. It may be there are no universal values, but maybe AI can be used as a way of preventing ourselves from killing each other. Maybe, just maybe. Or maybe we'll use it to make toys. There's a comment. I take that as an editorial remark. I liked what Nirvana said. Why assume one system of ethics? Why not embrace diversity? Certainly what we've done in this country, and to my mind, it's certainly something that's been working. And as she said, it is indeed beautiful. And it is more likely to produce solutions for the future. One of my own personal slogans is, in diversity, harmony. Now, that's not an ethical thing. That's a how you build a society thing, and maybe that's the deeper question. We looked at the uses of AI, what the role of corporations are using these tools. James Barrett talked about that quite a bit, talked about issues of racialization, gender norms, discrimination, things that corporations don't typically care about, things that people typically do. What even counts as a use of AI? Under what context can we and should we delegate decision-making to AI? This is a question that Ian Kerr asked. Reducing costs, is that a reason to use AI? Again, I've dealt in education for many years, and people always someone, and this conference was no different, always someone says, well, the best way to do education is with a small group of people and an excellent teacher. How are you going to pay for that? There are, 7-8 billion people on the planet. That makes about, say, 3 billion needing to be educated, give or take a billion. Let's say 3 billion, right? So let's group them into groups of, 10? So that's a small group. So that's 300 million teachers we need. 300 million good teachers we need to satisfy that model. There is not enough money in the world to do that. So as much as you like the idea that a small group with a good teacher is the way to go, this is something that Sir John Daniel, the Chancellor of the Open University, has been saying for decades. We can't afford to provide education equitably across the planet if we're going to do it using those methods, using those kind of approaches. We just can't do it. So we adopt the system we have in fact adopted. We teach an elite and say, well, forget the rest of them, there's nothing for them, we can't afford it. That's what we actually do now. Less so in some societies than others, but still, globally, that's what we do. Which raises, of course, the question of data activism. Timnet on the video raised this, talking about crashing cars using dummies that resemble men and not women and children, thus producing cars that disproportionately kill women and children. Also, the question of genetics. 99% of the genes used in genetic data processing are not African genes. And the thing is, if there were women in those rooms, if there were Africans in those rooms, then that would not be the case. That these things would be done differently. Data activism is a society-wide response to that sort of, I don't want to say manipulation because it's not even deliberate most of the time, but that sort of omission, that sort of unthinking way of thinking about technology. AI and law, again, Ian Kerr talked a bit about that. The one thing Ian said that I found was most striking, he quoted Lawrence Lessig saying that if we tried to put the First Amendment into law today, we would get it utterly wrong. And then he made a case for common law. Common law is a bit different from what Lessig talked about. Lessig, especially in Code and something law, Code and the Law of Cyberspace, is that the name of the book? Something like that. I'm not good with names. I mean, code is based on consensus. Code is based on protocol which is voluntarily adopted, right? People use a certain data format because it works for them. They're not forced to use it. There's no decision to use it. It's like a cow path that people create when they're walking across the grass, even though they're not supposed to. Common law is a very different thing. Common law is the set of decisions rendered by the courts over the years, used as precedent to gradually and iteratively create new law. One of these can be influenced by lawyers. One of these can be influenced by money. And that is, I think, the big difference between common law and protocol. Protocol is a social thing. It's like language. Common law is a legal thing. It's like wealth. Using AI in learning, bringing us to our conclusion, looking at AI bridging gaps, helping people who are unable to speak. These are excellent uses, but we have to be careful. It was pointed out by someone in the audience. I'm sorry, I don't know all your names, so I couldn't cite you. We have to be careful that AI isn't used to leave other people behind. You know, people who, for one reason or another, don't have access to AI, can't use AI. You have to remember, and this didn't come up either, but you have to remember, just like electricity is available in the walls now, just like writing is available anywhere we need it, learning and AI in the future will be commodities. We'll just plug into intelligent data processing whenever we need it. And that's what it's going to be like. But, you know, just like not everybody can deal with bright lights, not everybody can read, we're going to have accessibility issues with AI as well. And we need to be aware of that. We want to be ahead of that if we can. Almost done. In fact, I just want to comment very briefly the exercise at the end, which was a really fun exercise, I have to say, even though ours wasn't chosen. So I'll mope up here for a bit. But, you know, we had things that address student engagement, education, reinforcing the status quo, grade 6 math performance, big issue in society. Sorry, that was a little facetious. Support for non-traditional learning, buddy apps, learning tracker, bot, etc. The thing with this is this. And this is the thing for educators generally. We very often take, in technology and design, take a problem-based approach. Come up with a problem, then design a solution, right? I hate that approach. just me, not pretty much everyone else in the room loves it, but I hate it. I don't deal with problems. The reason why is problems are based in today's reality. Grade 6 math achievement is a great one, right? Is that really going to be a problem in 20 years? Is that the thing we need to be solving for? It's really hard to get the right problem. I like dealing in what are called affordances. Create something great and then imagine what people could do with it. And I have one example and then I'll leave you. The internet, okay, it was created to solve some problems. The big problem was how not to lose our infrastructure in the event of a nuclear war. But really, it created this, multi-trillion data and commerce network. And what do we use it for? Cat pictures, right? We send cat pictures to each other, and that's what makes the internet great. And that's why we love it, right? Now, if somebody had ever come up with the problem of how do I share a picture of my cat with someone in Japan, nobody would have taken me seriously. But that, in fact, is exactly what I use the internet for. And not just Japan, Mongolia too. So it's easy to think, yeah, we should really be problem focused, right? But being problem focused sharpens and narrows our view to the immediate and the front and the center. But if we really want to tap in to the capacity, the human capacity that we have, we need to be thinking, what could we make that would be really great, that people could do something creative with it? And that, I think, ultimately is what I would like AI to be. Thank you very much.